Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today, because what we are about to talk about is something that should concern anyone who cares about power, justice, and democracy. Here is the thing. What just happened should make anyone paying attention stop and take a breath. A former head of state, a man accused of destroying an entire country, a man who still claims to be the rightful president of Venezuela, is now sitting in a United States federal courtroom. Not after an extradition, not after a transparent legal process, but after what his lawyers describe as a covert seizure, and the implications of that should make people deeply uncomfortable. Because this is not just a dramatic headline. This is not just another strong man finally facing consequences. This is a moment that forces a much bigger question. What does justice actually look like when global power is involved? And where is the line between accountability and raw political force? The trial of Nicolás Maduro is dominating political news right now for one reason above all else. It does not fit into any familiar box. This is not a routine criminal case. This is not a war crimes tribunal. This is not an international court proceeding. This is the United States unilaterally prosecuting a foreign leader in its own courts. And the way it happened is raising alarms far beyond Venezuela. Here is the basic picture. Maduro ruled Venezuela for years while its economy collapsed. Democratic institutions were hollowed out. Millions fled the country. His government has long been accused of corruption, repression, and criminal activity. Now, American prosecutors allege that he personally participated in a massive drug trafficking conspiracy. They claim he coordinated with armed groups. They argue he used narcotics as a tool to harm the United States. Those accusations are serious, but accusations alone are not what make this story explosive. What makes this case different is how Maduro ended up on American soil. According to court filings and international reporting, there was no formal extradition request approved by Venezuelan courts. There was no public legal proceeding. Instead, Maduro was taken into custody during a covert operation while still inside Venezuela. He was then transported directly to the United States and placed into federal detention. Maduro says he was abducted. Now, you do not have to sympathize with him to understand why that matters, because if a powerful country can decide on its own to seize a foreign leader and put him on trial, that changes the rules for everyone. Former heads of state are almost never handled this way. Even brutal dictators. Even war criminals. Historically, there are processes, international warrants, extradition hearings, multilateral tribunals. This case skipped most of that. When Maduro appeared in court in Manhattan, the optics were striking. Heavy security, visible restraints, jail-issued clothing, cameras capturing a former president being marched through the system. It looked less like a legal proceeding and more like a message. And then came the courtroom behavior. Maduro did not sit quietly while his attorneys spoke. He addressed the court. He declared that he remains the legitimate president of Venezuela. He insisted that the United States has no jurisdiction over him. He claimed his detention violates international law. That is not normal. That is not how federal criminal cases usually begin. And it immediately transformed the trial into something much bigger than a question of guilt or innocence. The United States government's position is straightforward. They argue Maduro is not entitled to immunity. They say he is not a legitimate head of state. They say his alleged crimes strip him of protection. But here is why this matters. Those arguments do not just affect Maduro. They redefine how international law works in practice. Maduro's legal team is invoking sovereign immunity, the principle that sitting heads of state, and often former ones, cannot be prosecuted by foreign courts without specific legal mechanisms. That principle exists to prevent exactly this kind of power imbalance. It is meant to stop powerful countries from using their legal systems to punish political enemies. If the court rejects that argument entirely, it sets a precedent. It tells the world that legitimacy is something the United States alone can decide. That is an extraordinary amount of authority for any single country to claim. And this is not theoretical. We have seen moments like this before. In 1989, the United States captured Manuel Noriega in Panama and brought him to Florida to stand trial. At the time, it was justified as a response to criminal behavior and threats to American citizens. But it also involved a military invasion and massive civilian casualties. The legal precedent was controversial then, and it remains controversial now. After September 11th, the United States carried out extraordinary renditions. Suspects were seized abroad and transported to secret prisons. Those actions were later condemned, even by American courts and lawmakers, as violations of law and human rights. In Europe, Augusto Pinochet was arrested in London under an international warrant, not seized by force and flown to another country. Even then, the legal battles over jurisdiction and immunity lasted years. The difference matters. Those cases involved multilateral processes or were later acknowledged as mistakes. This case is being presented as a clean example of justice, and that should worry people. The deeper problem here is normalization. Once a practice becomes accepted, it becomes easier to use again. Today, it is Nicolás Maduro. Tomorrow, it could be someone else. And next time, it might not be someone universally condemned. Supporters of this prosecution argue that Maduro deserves no sympathy. They point to the suffering in Venezuela. They point to political prisoners. They point to the destruction of democratic norms. And they are right about the damage his government caused. But justice is not just about outcomes. It is about methods. If the rules only apply when convenient, they are not rules at all. They are tools. And this is where the broader context matters. Across the world, criminal law is increasingly being used as a geopolitical weapon. Sanctions target individuals instead of states. Indictments serve as diplomatic pressure. Arrest warrants become bargaining chips. The line between law enforcement and foreign policy grows thinner every year. This trial fits squarely into that trend. For the United States, this case is being framed as proof that no one is above the law, that even powerful leaders can be held accountable. That message plays well domestically. But in much of Latin America and the global South, it looks very different. It looks like selective enforcement. It looks like a powerful nation deciding when sovereignty matters and when it does not. And perception matters. Because international law relies on legitimacy. It relies on shared belief. When that belief erodes, the system weakens. There are also serious concerns about the integrity of the process itself. Reports about the judge's age and capacity have drawn scrutiny. The courtroom atmosphere has been described as chaotic at times. Outside, protests and misinformation campaigns have flooded social media with manipulated images and false narratives. All of this contributes to a sense that this is not a calm, neutral pursuit of justice. It feels messy, it feels rushed, and it feels politically charged. Here is the deeper issue. If the United States truly believes in a rules-based international order, then it must hold itself to the same standards it demands of others. For decades, American leaders have condemned extrajudicial actions by rival states. They have criticized kidnappings. They have opposed unilateral prosecutions. They have insisted on due process and international cooperation. So the question becomes unavoidable. Do those principles still apply when the defendant is someone we hate? Because once you abandon them, you cannot easily reclaim them. This case is not just about Venezuela. It is not just about drugs or corruption. It is about whether global justice is something built on law or something enforced by power. And the consequences will last far longer than this trial. If courts uphold this approach, future leaders will take note. Smaller countries will feel more vulnerable. Alliances will shift. Trust will erode. And the idea that international law protects everyone equally will fade even further. That does not mean Maduro should escape accountability. It means accountability must be real, transparent, and consistent. Otherwise, justice becomes indistinguishable from domination. So as this trial continues, pay attention not only to the verdict. Pay attention to the arguments being accepted. Pay attention to the precedents being set. Pay attention to what is being normalized. Because once a line is crossed often enough, it stops looking like a line at all. If you want to stay informed about stories like this, stories that go beyond headlines and force uncomfortable questions about power and democracy, make sure you subscribe. Share this with others who care about context, not just outrage. And stay engaged, because what happens in that courtroom does not just affect one man or one country. It affects how the world understands justice in the age of power. Thank you for listening. Stay informed, stay engaged, and I will see you in the next one.